Please, just wake up." Nina's voice broke halfway through the sentence, but she didn't try to fix it. Her fingers tightened around his hand, as if letting go might make something worse happen. She didn't move away this time. She didn't return to her cart, didn't reach for her cloth. She stayed right there beside the bed, leaning slightly forward, her other hand pressed against the edge of the mattress to steady herself. The ICU lights cast a soft glow over his face, pale and still. Untouched by the weight of the world everyone else kept attaching to his name. Nina swallowed, but the knot in her throat didn't go away. "You can't just stop like this," she whispered, her eyes fixed on him as if willing him to respond. "Not after everything." The room remained quiet except for the steady rhythm of the monitor. It was a sound she had come to recognize. But tonight, it felt different. Like it was counting something down instead of keeping something alive. Nina's thumb moved slowly across his knuckles, a small, repetitive motion that seemed to calm her more than him. "I know you probably can't hear me," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "Everyone keeps saying that. Brain activity, deep coma, all those words." She let out a faint breath, something between a sigh and a quiet laugh. "But I've seen things they don't talk about. Small things. People coming back when no one expected them to." Her grip on his hand tightened again. "So I'm going to talk anyway." Tears slipped down her cheeks without warning. She didn't wipe them away. They fell freely, one after another, landing on the back of his hand, warm against the coolness of his skin. "You don't even know me," she continued, her voice trembling but steady enough to keep going. "And I don't really know you either. Not the way they do, not the stories, not the headlines." She shook her head slightly, as if pushing those thoughts aside. "But I know what I've seen." She leaned closer, her forehead almost level with his hand. "I saw the way you paid for that kid's surgery last month. Nobody made a big deal about it. It wasn't on the news. The nurses talked about it like it was nothing, like it didn't count because of who you are." Her lips pressed together for a moment before she continued. "But it counted to that kid. It counted to his mother." Her voice steadied as she spoke, as if the memories gave her something solid to hold on to. "And the cafeteria staff, you remember them? Probably not. People like us don't really stand out." A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "But they remember you. You made sure nobody got laid off last winter when the hospital cut funding. I heard them talking about it when they thought no one was listening." She glanced up at his face, searching for any sign, any movement. There was none. Still, she didn't stop. "You could have ignored it. Most people do. But you didn't." Another tear fell, tracing the same path as the others. Nina shifted slightly in her chair but didn't let go of his hand. "I don't care what they say about you," she whispered. "I don't care about the money or the power or whatever else comes with your name." Her voice lowered, more intimate now. "I care about the things people don't see, the things that don't get reported." She swallowed again, her chest tightening. "You don't get to do all that, and then just disappear." Outside the room, a cart rolled past, the faint sound of wheels against tile briefly interrupting the quiet before fading away. Inside, nothing changed. The machines continued their steady pattern, indifferent, consistent. Nina leaned back slightly, but her hand remained firmly around his. "I talk a lot, don't I?" she said softly, almost embarrassed. "It's easier when you don't interrupt." The corner of her mouth lifted faintly, but it didn't last. "I guess that makes me selfish." She shook her head again. "No, maybe just honest." She looked down at their hands, her fingers intertwined with his in a way that felt natural now, not forced. "My name is Nina," she said after a moment, her tone quieter but more certain. "I don't think anyone's told you that. They don't really tell you anything personal, do they? Just numbers, reports." She exhaled slowly. "But if you wake up, I want you to know who was here." Her thumb brushed over his skin again, slower this time. "Not because it matters to anyone else, just because it matters to me." The silence stretched, but it no longer felt empty. It felt heavy, filled with words that had nowhere else to go. Nina lowered her head slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with each breath she tried to steady. "You're not alone," she whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. "Not right now. Not while I'm here." Her grip on his hand softened just enough to be gentle, not desperate. So, please, just try. Just a little. Deep beneath the stillness, something stirred. Not enough to move, not enough to break through the weight pressing down on him, but enough to register warmth, pressure, a voice that didn't sound like orders or fear. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. Something real. Nina didn't notice. She sat there, tears still falling, her hand still holding his, her presence steady in a room that had known nothing but silence. For the first time since she had entered, she didn't feel invisible. She felt needed. Even if he never opened his eyes, even if no one else ever understood it, she stayed. And in that quiet, something unseen began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if the darkness itself was listening. Nina didn't realize how long she had stayed until the hallway lights dimmed another level, signaling the deeper stretch of the night shift. Her hand still rested in his, her thumb moving slowly across his knuckles in a quiet, repetitive rhythm. When the soft knock came at the door, she straightened slightly but didn't pull away. "Housekeeping," she said under her breath, though she was already inside. The door opened anyway, and Dr. Harris stepped in, closing it behind him with the same controlled motion he used for everything. His eyes moved first to the monitor, then to Alex, then to Nina. He didn't look surprised. "You're off schedule," he said. Nina eased her hand away carefully this time, though not without hesitation. "I know. I just needed a few more minutes." He nodded and moved closer to the bed, checking the monitor without rushing. "Sometimes people take more than minutes," he said. "Sometimes they take time no one else is willing to give. That's not in your job description." Nina let out a quiet breath. "A lot of things aren't." He adjusted the IV line, then glanced at her. "You talked to him?" "Yes." "Good. Keep doing that." She frowned slightly. "They said he can't hear." "They say a lot of things," he replied. "Medicine explains what we can measure. It doesn't explain everything. If anything is reaching him, it won't be noise. It'll be something steady." Nina absorbed that in silence. "You can stay a few more minutes," he added. "Just don't make it obvious." "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "What's your name?" "Nina." He repeated it once, then turned toward the door. "Good night, Nina." "Good night, Doctor." When the door closed, the room settled again, but not in the same way as before. Nina looked back at Alex, at the faint rise of his chest, at the stillness that now felt less fixed. She pulled the chair closer and sat, her movement slower, more deliberate. "They don't think you can hear me," she said, her voice calm now. "But someone does." She reached for his hand again, this time with intention, her fingers wrapping around his as if she had already decided something. "So I'll keep talking." She leaned back slightly, letting the words come without forcing them. "People think power protects you, like it builds distance." She glanced at him. "From what I've seen, it just makes things quieter." Her thumb moved again across his skin. "At the diner, it's loud all the time. Plates, voices, people complaining about things that don't matter. But at least they're there. They say what they mean." She paused briefly. "Here, people say less, but they mean more." The monitor flickered faintly, and this time she noticed, her eyes shifting toward it before returning to him. "They're already making decisions for you," she continued. "I hear them in the hallway, talking about what happens next. No one's asking what you want." She let that sit for a moment, her grip tightening slightly. "I don't know who you were before this. Not really. But I know what you did for people who couldn't give you anything back. That counts, even if no one says it out loud." The room remained still. After a while, Nina stood slowly, her knees stiff from sitting too long. She adjusted the blanket again, smoothing it with careful hands, as if that small act still mattered. "I'll come back," she said quietly. "Later today." She stepped back and turned toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle. Then something shifted. It was small, almost nothing, but it was there. Nina froze, her body going completely still. Her eyes dropped to his hand. His fingers had moved, just slightly, a faint shift against the fabric. She didn't breathe. "Wait," she whispered. She stepped closer again, faster now, her heart picking up hard enough that she could feel it in her chest. No, I saw that. Her hands hovered above his, afraid to touch, afraid it might stop. Then it happened again. A second twitch. Clearer this time. Nina's breath broke into a sharp gasp. Oh my God, you moved. If this moment touched you, tell me where you're watching from and what you felt right then. Like the video if you believe small acts of care can change everything, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that remind us what truly matters. Her voice trembled, disbelief turning into something brighter, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. She grabbed his hand again, not roughly, but with urgency. Can you hear me? Can you? The monitor flickered again, slightly faster. That was enough. Nina turned toward the door so quickly she nearly lost her balance. She pulled it open and called into the hallway, her voice cutting through the quiet. Dr. Harris, please, he moved. Footsteps came immediately. Doctor, Harris reappeared within seconds, his expression sharpened now, alert. What happened? His hand, Nina said, stepping aside but staying close. It moved. I saw it twice. Doctor, Harris moved to the bedside, eyes on the monitor, then on Alex's hand. Easy, he said, more to the moment than to her. He watched closely. For a second, nothing changed. Then a slight movement again, controlled, not random. Dr. Harris exhaled slowly. All right, he pressed a button for additional staff. Let's not rush conclusions, he said, though his tone had shifted. But that's not nothing. Nina stood still, her hands now clasped together, her eyes fixed on Alex, as if she was afraid the moment might vanish if she looked away. I told you, she whispered under her breath. I told you could hear me. Doctor, Harris glanced at her briefly, then back at the patient. Whatever you've been doing, he said quietly, don't stop. Nina nodded, unable to speak. The room no longer felt like it had before. The silence was different now, no longer empty, no longer passive. Something had changed, and this time it wasn't hidden. The shift didn't end when the extra staff arrived. It only changed shape. Nina stayed close to the wall as two nurses entered behind Dr. Harris, their movements quick but controlled, voices low, focused on numbers, responses, patterns. No one asked her to leave, but no one asked her to stay either. She remained where she was, watching, her eyes fixed on Alex, as if the moment might slip backward if she blinked. Doctor, Harris adjusted the monitor again, then checked Alex's pupils with a small penlight. Response is present, he said. More to the room than to anyone specific. Minimal, but intentional. One of the nurses noted it down. The other adjusted the IV rate. Nina listened without fully understanding the terms, but she understood the tone. Something had changed, and it wasn't being dismissed. Let's keep stimulation low, Dr. Harris continued. No overload. He stepped back slightly, giving space to the machines, to the body in the bed, to whatever process had begun. Then he turned his head just enough to acknowledge Nina. You can stay, he said quietly. Just, don't crowd him. Nina nodded immediately, her hands still clasped together, her breath steadying slowly as the initial rush settled into something deeper. She moved a little closer again, not to touch, not yet, but close enough to feel connected to what was happening. The nurses finished their checks and stepped out, leaving the room quieter again. Not the same quiet as before. This one carried attention. Nina pulled the chair back into place and sat down, her posture more careful now, as if she were aware that every movement might matter. She looked at Alex, studying the lines of his face, searching for something she hadn't noticed before. You did that, she said softly, almost in disbelief. That was you. Her voice didn't rise, didn't rush. It stayed steady, anchored in the moment. They saw it too. Dr. Harris remained by the foot of the bed, reviewing the chart again. This doesn't mean he's waking up tomorrow, he said without looking up. Progress isn't a straight line. Nina nodded, though he couldn't see it. I understand. He glanced at her then. Do you? There was no challenge in his tone, just a question that expected honesty. Nina thought about it for a second. No, she admitted, but I'm not going anywhere. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. That might be enough. Time passed differently after that. Nina didn't track it by the clock anymore, but by the rhythm of the room, by the slight variations in the monitor, by the way Alex's hand felt when she finally reached for it again. This time, she didn't rush. She placed her hand over his slowly, letting the contact settle. "If you can hear me," she said, her voice quieter now, more focused. "You need to keep doing that. Not for them. For you." Her thumb moved lightly across his skin again, the same motion as before, but now it carried intention. "They're already planning things out there, I told you." She paused briefly, watching for any response. But there was none. Not yet. She leaned back slightly in the chair, her gaze never leaving him. "I don't know what your life looks like outside this room," she continued. "I hear pieces of it, but pieces don't tell the whole story." She tilted her head a little. "What I do know is that people don't wait around like this unless there's something they want. And most of them aren't waiting for you to get better." Her voice remained calm, but there was a firmness underneath it now. "So if you're in there, you don't get to stay quiet forever." Dr. Harris closed the chart and set it aside. "You're direct," he said. Nina gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. "I don't think he needs polite right now." "You might be right," he replied. He stepped closer to the bed again, watching the monitor for a few seconds before speaking. "The brain responds to familiarity, to repetition, to something consistent." He glanced at her. "You've been that." Nina absorbed that quietly, her expression unchanged but her grip tightening slightly around Alex's hand. "I didn't plan to be," she said. "I was just doing my job." Dr. Harris shook his head once. "No, you started there. You're not there anymore." He didn't explain further, and she didn't ask. Nina looked back at Alex, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to see past the stillness. "You heard me before," she said, more certain now. "That's why you moved." She leaned forward just a little. "So listen again. You're not done. Whatever you think is waiting for you out there, it's still there. You don't get to walk away from it like this." Her voice softened slightly at the end, but it didn't lose its edge. "And I'm not going to sit here talking to you if you're not going to meet me halfway." The monitor held steady. The room didn't shift the way it had before, but it didn't fall back into silence either. It stayed in that space between. After a while, Dr. Harris checked his watch. "I'll need to run a few more tests in the morning," he said. "We'll monitor for additional responses." Nina nodded. "I'll be here." He gave her a look that lingered a second longer than necessary. "You have another job, don't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Morning shift." "You should sleep." Nina shook her head slightly. "Later." He didn't argue. "Just don't burn yourself out before he gets a chance to wake up." She almost smiled at that. "I'll manage." When he stepped out of the room, Nina was alone again with Alex. She adjusted her position in the chair, settling in as if she had already decided she wasn't leaving anytime soon. "You made things complicated," she said quietly, her eyes still on him. "Now they're watching you. Now they expect something." She exhaled slowly. "So you better keep going." Her hand remained steady over his, her presence unchanged. Outside, the hospital continued its slow, quiet movement through the night. Inside the room, nothing dramatic happened. No sudden movement, no second response. But the stillness no longer felt final. It felt like something in progress. Something building in a way that couldn't be rushed or forced. Nina leaned back slightly, her voice dropping just enough to feel private. "My name is Nina," she said again, even though she had told him before. "In case you forgot already." A faint pause followed. "And I'm still here." Morning didn't arrive all at once. It edged in slowly through the thin line of light beneath the blinds, shifting the room from artificial blue to something closer to real. Nina noticed it before she noticed the time. Her body felt the difference first. The quiet change in the air, the distant sounds of carts and voices growing more frequent in the hallway. She hadn't left. At some point she had leaned back in the chair, her head resting lightly against the wall for a few minutes, but her hand had never moved far from his. When she opened her eyes fully, the monitor was still steady, the same controlled rhythm, but she no longer saw it the same way. It wasn't just keeping track. It was waiting. She sat up straighter and looked at Alex, studying his face again as if something might have changed overnight without her noticing. "You picked a good time to start moving," she said quietly. Her voice still low but more grounded now. Morning makes people pay attention. She reached for his hand again, slower this time, almost careful not to assume too much. So don't stop now. A nurse entered without knocking, pushing the door open with her shoulder while checking a chart. She paused when she saw Nina still there. "You're still here?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a tone that suggested it wasn't expected. Nina nodded once. "Yes." The nurse glanced at the monitor, then at Alex's hand, then back at Nina. "I heard about last night," she said. "Dr. Harris already updated the file." Nina didn't respond right away. "He moved," she said instead, as if repeating it made it more certain. The nurse gave a small nod. "That's what they said." She stepped closer, adjusting a line, checking numbers. "We'll see if it holds." Nina watched her hands, efficient, practiced, detached in a way that made sense for someone who saw this every day. "It will," Nina said quietly. The nurse glanced at her briefly, then returned to her work. "We hope so." After she left, the room settled again, but the quiet wasn't as complete as before. The hospital was waking up, and with it came attention, movement, expectation. Nina shifted slightly in her chair, aware now that she was no longer invisible in the same way. People knew something had happened in this room. People would come in and out, checking, measuring, watching for confirmation. She looked at Alex again. "You did that," she said softly. "Now they're watching you." Her fingers tightened slightly around his. "So you better give them something to see." She leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. "I don't think you realize how close they were to writing you off," she continued. "Maybe you do. Maybe that's why you moved." She paused, considering that for a moment. "If that's the case, then you already know what's waiting out there." Her gaze stayed steady on his face. "And if you don't, I'll tell you anyway. They're not waiting for you to come back. They're preparing for you not to." Footsteps passed outside the door, slower now, more deliberate. Voices followed, then faded. Nina didn't look away. "So if you're still in there," she said, her tone firm but controlled, "you don't get to stay quiet just because it's easier. You started something. You need to finish it." The door opened again, this time with more purpose. Dr. Harris stepped in, already reviewing a fresh chart. He looked at Nina briefly, then at Alex. "Any additional movement?" he asked. Nina shook her head. "Not since last night." He nodded, as if that was expected. "That's fine. We're not looking for repetition yet. Just confirmation that the response wasn't random." He stepped closer, checking the monitor again, then gently lifted Alex's hand, watching closely before placing it back down. "The body remembers before it fully returns," he said, more to himself than to her. Nina watched carefully. "So he's coming back," she said. Dr. Harris didn't answer immediately. He adjusted something on the machine, then looked at her. "He's trying," he said. "That's different." Nina considered that, then nodded once. "Trying is enough for now." He studied her for a moment. "You stayed all night." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you have another shift." "Yes." He exhaled lightly. "You won't be much use to anyone if you collapse." Nina didn't argue. "I'll rest later." He didn't push further, just nodded slightly. "Don't make a habit of ignoring your limits." She gave a faint, almost tired smile. "I've been doing that for years." Dr. Harris almost responded to that, then stopped himself. Instead, he stepped back, giving space again. "We'll run more tests this afternoon," he said. "Until then, keep things consistent." He glanced at her hand resting near Alex's. "That includes you." Nina understood what he meant without needing it explained. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. When he left, Nina shifted in her chair again, stretching her fingers slightly before placing her hand back over his. The contact felt different now, not just something she offered, but something that might be received. "You heard him," she said quietly. "You're trying." She let that sit for a moment. "That's more than most people do when things get hard." She leaned back slightly, letting her shoulders relax for the first time since the night before. "I used to think trying didn't matter unless you got somewhere," she admitted. "Like if it didn't change anything, Then what was the point? Her thumb moved slowly again across his hand. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe trying is what changes things. Just slower than people expect. The monitor held steady. The room remained calm, but the stillness no longer carried the same weight. It felt like something in motion, even if it couldn't be seen yet. Nina looked at him again, her expression steady, no longer searching for proof every second. "You don't have to rush," she said. "Just don't stop." She paused, then added, "That's all I'm asking." Outside, the day continued to build, the hospital filling with voices, footsteps, decisions being made in rooms far from this one. Inside, Nina remained where she was, her hand steady over his, her presence unchanged. The difference now was simple but undeniable. She wasn't waiting for something to happen anymore. She was part of it. By late morning, the rhythm of the room had changed again, not because anything dramatic happened, but because more people were paying attention. Nina noticed it in the way the door opened more often, in the way nurses lingered a second longer than necessary when checking the monitors, in the way conversations in the hallway dropped slightly when they passed this room. News traveled fast in a place like this, and what had happened during the night had already spread beyond the ICU. She remained in her chair, her posture quieter now, less urgent, but her hand still close enough to his that she could reach it without thinking. "You've got an audience now," she said softly, her eyes resting on his face. "Not the kind you'd want, I think." She leaned back a little, exhaling slowly. "They're not here for you. They're here for what happens next." The door opened again, and this time 2 men stepped in, both dressed in dark suits that didn't belong in a hospital room. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Nina had seen enough of them over the past few weeks to understand their place without being told. One stood closer to the door, the other moved toward the bed, his eyes scanning everything quickly before settling on Alex. "Any changes?" he asked, not looking at Nina, directing the question to no one in particular. Nina didn't answer. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to. Dr. Harris followed a second later, stepping into the room with a file in his hand. "Minimal motor response observed last night," he said calmly. "We're monitoring for consistency." The man near the bed nodded once. "That means he's waking up?" Dr. Harris didn't rush his answer. "It means he's responding." Those are not the same thing. Nina watched the exchange quietly, her gaze moving between them, noticing the difference in how they spoke. The men in suits were focused on outcomes, on conclusions. Dr. Harris stayed with the process, with what could be observed, not assumed. "We need clarity," the second man said, his voice controlled but firm. "There are decisions waiting." Nina felt her grip tighten slightly around the edge of the chair. Decisions. The word landed heavier than it should have. Dr. Harris met his gaze without shifting. "Then you'll need to wait," he replied. "The body doesn't follow your schedule." The man didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Alex again, then at the monitor, then finally at Nina for the first time. His eyes lingered just long enough to acknowledge her presence, then moved away as if she didn't factor into the situation. "Keep us informed," he said, already turning toward the door. Both men left without another word. The room felt different after they were gone, not quieter, but more exposed. Nina exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. "That's what I meant," she said, looking back at Alex. "They're already moving things around you." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering again. "So whatever you're doing, you need to keep doing it." Her hand moved back to his, resting over it again, steady. "Because if you don't, they'll decide everything for you." Dr. Harris remained by the foot of the bed, watching the monitor for a few seconds before speaking. "You handled that well," he said. Nina glanced at him briefly. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly," he replied. "Sometimes that's the right approach." He closed the file and set it aside. "They're not interested in recovery. They're interested in control." Nina nodded slowly. "I figured that much." He looked at her again, more directly this time. "You should be careful." She frowned slightly. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "Because you're involved now," he said finally. "Whether you intended to be or not." Nina sat back, considering that. "I didn't sign up for that," she said. "No one does," he replied. "But here you are." He gestured slightly toward Alex. "And he responded when you were here, not when they were." Nina didn't respond, but the meaning settled in. She looked down at Alex's hand, then back at his face. "So what does that mean?" she asked. Dr. Harris shook his head lightly. "It means we keep going, carefully." He stepped back. "I'll check in again this afternoon. Before leaving," he added, "try to get some rest." Nina gave a small nod, though she didn't move. When the door closed again, the room returned to its quieter state, but the weight of the earlier conversation remained. Nina shifted in her chair, her fingers brushing lightly across Alex's hand again. "You picked a complicated life," she said, not unkindly. "I don't know how much of it you chose and how much of it chose you." She tilted her head slightly. "But right now, it's all waiting on you." She leaned forward again, her voice steady but more personal. "I'm not part of that world," she said. "I don't know your people, your business, any of it." Her thumb moved slowly across his skin. "But I know what I saw, and I know what you did last night." She paused briefly. "That wasn't nothing." The monitor remained steady. No new movement followed. Nina didn't expect it immediately this time. She had adjusted her expectations, not lowering them, but pacing them. "You don't have to prove anything right now," she continued. "Just don't go backward." She let the silence sit for a moment, then added, "That's how people lose everything. Not all at once, just little by little." She leaned back again, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I'll probably get in trouble for staying this long," she said quietly, "but I'll deal with that later." A faint hint of a smile crossed her face. "Wouldn't be the first time." She looked at him again, her expression steady. "You just focus on what you're doing." Time moved forward, measured now not by urgency but by presence. The room held steady, the monitor unchanged, the light shifting slightly as the day continued. Nina remained where she was, no longer waiting for proof every second, but still watching, still connected. "You're not alone in here," she said after a while, her voice softer now. "Not anymore." By early afternoon, the room had settled into a pattern that felt almost predictable, not because anything stopped happening, but because nothing rushed anymore. Nina noticed it in the way the machines held steady, in the way no one hurried in or out unless there was a reason, in the way even the noise from the hallway seemed to pass by instead of breaking through. She shifted slightly in her chair, rolling her shoulders once to ease the stiffness that had built up over hours of staying in the same position. Her hand hovered near his again, not gripping this time, just resting close enough to return without thinking. "You're quieter today," she said, her voice low but clear. "Or maybe I'm just getting used to waiting." She leaned forward a little, studying his face the same way she had learned to do, not looking for obvious signs, but for anything subtle, anything that didn't belong to stillness. "They came in earlier," she continued. "The ones in suits. You probably know them better than I do." A faint pause followed. "They don't talk like people who are worried about you. They talk like people who are already moving on." Her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of his hand, not quite holding it yet. "I don't like that." The door opened halfway and a younger nurse stepped in, checking the chart quickly before glancing toward Nina. "You're still here?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a hint of curiosity that hadn't been there before. Nina nodded once. "Yeah." The nurse stepped closer, scanning the monitor, then Alex's face. "No new movement?" "Not since last night," Nina replied. The nurse nodded, making a note. "That's normal," she said. "Sometimes the first response is just that, a first step." She hesitated a second, then added, "You were here when it happened?" Nina didn't look away from Alex. "Yes." The nurse studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod that felt less like acknowledgement and more like respect. "Keep talking to him," she said quietly, "even if it feels like nothing's happening." Nina let out a small breath. "I will." The nurse left without another word. When the door closed, Nina leaned back again, her hand finally settling over his, the contact steady, familiar. "You hear that?" she said. "Even they think it matters." She shifted slightly, her voice lowering just enough to feel more personal. "So don't make me look like I imagined it." The monitor held its rhythm, nothing changed on the surface. Nina didn't rush to fill the silence this time. She let it sit, letting the quiet stretch until it felt natural again. Then she spoke, slower now, choosing her words more carefully. "I used to think people like you didn't notice anything," she said. "Too busy, too far removed. Her thumb moved once across his hand. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think you noticed more than you let on. She paused, considering that thought as if she were testing it out. You just didn't say anything, she added, and people filled in the gaps however they wanted. Her gaze stayed steady on him. That's what they're doing now. Footsteps passed outside, voices low, then gone. Nina shifted again, leaning forward slightly. You don't get to let them decide who you are, she said, her tone firm but not raised. Not when you're still here. Her fingers tightened just a little. If you don't come back, they'll turn you into whatever they need you to be. A faint change in the monitor caught her attention, not dramatic, just a slight variation that made her sit up straighter. She watched closely, her breath slowing, her focus narrowing. Do that again, she said quietly. Not for me, for you. Her hand stayed steady. Not pressing, not pulling. Just there. Nothing followed immediately. The line on the screen returned to its previous pattern. Nina didn't pull back this time. She stayed where she was, her eyes still on his hand, her expression unchanged. All right, she murmured. Take your time. She leaned back again, letting the moment pass without forcing it. Minutes stretched into something less defined. Nina reached for the cup of water on the side table, took a small sip, then set it back down. I should probably leave soon, she said, though she didn't move, at least long enough to pretend I have another life outside this room. A faint hint of a smile crossed her face, then faded. But I'll come back. You already know that. She adjusted her position again, her hand still resting over his. You started something last night, she said, and I don't think you did that by accident. Her voice softened slightly. So, whatever's going on in your head, don't stop now. The door opened again, this time without hesitation. Dr. Harris stepped in, reviewing a tablet as he walked. How are we doing? He asked, his tone calm, routine. Same, Nina replied. No new movement. He nodded, stepping closer to the bed. That's expected. He checked the monitor, then Alex's hand, then looked at Nina. And you? She shrugged lightly. Still here. He almost smiled at that. I can see that. He tapped something into the tablet, then looked back at the patient. The body doesn't rush recovery, he said. It builds it. Nina nodded slowly. Feels like waiting. It is waiting, he replied. But it's not empty. He glanced at her hand resting over Alex's. You're part of that now. Nina looked down briefly, then back up. I didn't plan to be. No one plans for this, he said. But here you are. He stepped back slightly. We'll continue monitoring. If there's another response, call immediately. She nodded. I will. When he left, the room returned to its quiet rhythm again. But Nina no longer felt like she was just sitting in it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low, steady. You hear all of this? She said. They're watching, waiting, measuring. She paused, then added, I'm not measuring anything. I'm just here. Her hand remained where it was, her presence unchanged. So you don't have to prove anything to me, she said softly. Just don't disappear. The monitor continued its steady pattern, but the space between each sound no longer felt like silence. It felt like something building, something not yet visible, but no longer uncertain. Nina stayed in her chair, her hand over his, her voice the only constant in a room that was slowly shifting from stillness into something else. By late afternoon, the light in the room shifted again. No longer the soft gray of early day, but something warmer, angled through the blinds and stretching across the floor in long lines. Nina noticed it without thinking, the way her body had started noticing small changes before her mind did. She hadn't left. At some point she had stood, walked a few steps to ease the stiffness in her legs, then returned to the chair without making a decision about it. Her hand found his again the same way it always did now, not searching, just returning. You're still quiet, she said, her voice steady, not expecting an answer but not speaking into emptiness either. But it doesn't feel the same as before. She leaned back slightly, watching his face. Before, it felt like nothing was there. Now it feels like you're somewhere. The door opened without warning this time, and the same two men from earlier stepped in again, their presence more direct, less patient. Nina didn't move. She kept her hand where it was, her posture unchanged. One of them glanced at her briefly, then at Alex, then back to the monitor. "Any progress?" he asked. Dr. Harris entered right behind them, already responding. "No additional motor response since last observation," he said calmly. But the initial reaction was not reflexive. The second man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Alex's face. "That's not enough," he said. "We need to know where this is going." Nina felt something shift in her chest at the way he said it, like this wasn't about a person at all, but a situation that needed resolving. Dr. Harris didn't react to the tone. "Then you'll need to wait," he replied. "Recovery doesn't follow urgency." The first man exhaled sharply. "We don't have the luxury of waiting." Nina's fingers tightened slightly around Alex's hand before she could stop herself. She didn't look at them, but she listened. "Then you'll have to make decisions without certainty," Dr. Harris said, "because that's where we are." The second man turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward Nina again, more directly this time. "And she?" he asked. "She's here every time something happens." Nina finally looked up, meeting his eyes without lowering hers. "I work here," she said simply. He held her gaze for a moment, as if weighing something, then looked away. "Keep it that way," he said, though it sounded less like instruction and more like a warning. They didn't stay long after that. The tension they brought with them lingered even after they left, settling into the room like something that didn't belong but refused to disappear. Nina exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. "That's what I was talking about," she said, her voice quieter now but more focused. "They're not waiting for you. They're preparing for what happens if you don't come back." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on his. "So you don't get to stay in between forever." She watched him closely, not expecting movement immediately, but not dismissing the possibility either. "I don't know what you were to them," she continued. "Boss, partner, problem, probably all three." Her thumb moved once across his hand. "But right now, you're just a man in a bed, and they're already deciding how that ends." Her voice didn't rise, didn't carry anger, just a steady clarity. "That should bother you." The monitor shifted slightly again, not as clearly as before, but enough to pull her attention. Nina leaned in, her focus narrowing. "Do that again," she said. Softer now. "Not because they're here, because you are." She waited, her breath slow, her hand still. Nothing followed right away. She didn't pull back. "All right," she murmured. "You're pacing it." The door opened again, this time slower. A different figure stepped in, younger than the others, but carrying the same controlled presence. He didn't speak immediately. His eyes moved from Alex to Nina, then to the monitor, then back again. "So it's true," he said finally, his voice lower, more measured. Nina didn't answer. She didn't know if she was supposed to. Dr. Harris, who had remained just outside the room, stepped back in. "We've observed a response," he confirmed. The man nodded slightly, his gaze returning to Alex. "He always did take his time," he said, almost to himself. Nina watched him carefully. There was something different in the way he spoke. Less urgency, more familiarity. "You know him," she said before she could stop herself. The man glanced at her, not surprised by the question. "Long enough," he replied. His eyes moved back to Alex. "If he's moving, it's not random." Nina held his gaze for a second longer, then looked back at Alex. "I know," she said quietly. The man stepped closer to the bed, not touching, just observing. "He doesn't like being watched," he said. Nina almost smiled at that, a brief flicker that disappeared as quickly as it came. "Then he picked the wrong place," she replied. The man looked at her again, this time with a hint of something that wasn't dismissal. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe this is exactly where he needs to be." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It carried awareness now, attention from more than one direction. Nina felt it, the shift from isolation to something shared, even if she didn't trust all of it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping again. "You hear all of this?" she said to Alex. Different voices, different expectations. Her hand tightened, just enough to be felt. "Ignore them. Focus on what you started." The man in the room didn't interrupt. He watched, then stepped back, giving space in a way the others hadn't. "If he responds again," he said to Dr. Harris, "call me." Dr. Harris nodded. "We will." The man paused at the door, then looked back once more before leaving without another word. When the room cleared again, Nina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You've got more people now," she said quietly. "Some of them might actually want you back. Hard to tell." She leaned back slightly, her hand still steady over his. "But that doesn't change anything. You're the one who has to decide." She studied his face again, not searching for signs, just staying present. "You don't have to rush," she said, "but you don't get to stop either." Her voice softened, just slightly at the end. "That's the deal now." The monitor continued its steady rhythm, but the room no longer felt like a place where nothing happened. It felt like something building, slowly, deliberately, beyond what anyone else in the hallway could measure. Nina stayed where she was, her hand over his, her presence unchanged, but her understanding different now. She wasn't just waiting anymore. She was holding a line that no one else in the room seemed to see. By early evening, the room no longer belonged entirely to silence. It held something else now, a tension that came and went depending on who stepped through the door. Nina felt it without needing to name it. She had shifted her chair slightly closer to the bed, not enough to interfere with anything, just enough that she didn't have to reach as far anymore. Her hand rested over his again, steady, familiar, as if the space between them had already been decided. "You're still holding back," she said quietly, her eyes on his face. "I can feel it." She paused, then added, "Not stopping. Just not all the way here yet." The monitor continued its rhythm, unchanged on the surface, but Nina no longer relied on it to tell her what was happening. She watched him instead, the way his breathing settled, the way his fingers sometimes seemed almost ready to move again, before going still. The door opened, and Dr. Harris stepped in, this time without a chart in his hand, which told her more than anything else. He wasn't here for routine. He moved to the bedside, observing without touching at first. "Any changes?" he asked. Nina shook her head. "Not since earlier." He nodded once, then looked at Alex's face more closely, his expression thoughtful. "That's all right," he said. "The first response breaks the surface. The next ones take more effort." Nina leaned forward slightly. "So what happens now?" Dr. Harris rested his hand lightly on the railing. "Now we wait for consistency," he said, "and we don't interrupt what's already trying to happen." Nina considered that, then looked back at Alex. "He's listening," she said, more certain than before. Dr. Harris didn't dismiss it. "Then give him something worth listening to," he replied. There was no hint of encouragement in his tone, just a statement that carried weight. Nina nodded slowly, absorbing it, then shifted her chair closer by a few inches, not thinking about whether she was supposed to. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping, more focused now. "You've got people circling," she said. "Some of them want you back, some of them don't." Her thumb moved lightly across his hand. "I don't know which is worse." She paused, then continued. "But I know this. If you stay like this, they'll decide everything for you." Her grip tightened just enough to be felt. "And I don't think you're the kind of man who lets other people decide." For a moment, nothing changed. Then something did. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. His fingers moved again, not a twitch this time, not something that could be explained away. A slow, deliberate shift against her hand. Nina froze. Her breath caught before she even realized it. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his hand. She didn't move, didn't tighten her grip, just held still, afraid that anything might break the moment. "Do that again." Her voice was barely audible now. And then, another movement, stronger this time. His fingers pressed slightly against hers. Nina inhaled sharply, the sound escaping before she could stop it. "You're here," she said, her voice breaking but steady enough to carry meaning. "You're actually here." She leaned closer, her face now just inches from his, searching for any sign beyond the movement. "Can you hear me? If you can, Don't stop. Dr. Harris had already stepped closer, his attention sharpened immediately. He didn't interrupt her. He watched, observed, measured without interfering. That's intentional, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. He reached for the monitor, adjusting a setting, then looked back at Alex's face. Stay with it, he added, this time directed at Nina. She nodded quickly, her focus never leaving Alex. You heard him, she said, her voice firmer now. Stay with it, don't drift. Her hand tightened around his, no longer cautious, now grounded. You started this. Keep going. The room seemed to narrow around that moment, everything else fading into background noise. The machines, the hallway, the hospital itself all felt distant compared to the connection forming in that space. Nina didn't look away. She didn't speak for a few seconds, letting the silence hold, letting him meet it. Then she spoke again, slower. You don't have to prove anything to them, she said. Just stay here. That's enough. Her voice softened slightly. That's more than enough. A faint shift passed through his hand again, not as strong as before, but still there. Enough to confirm what she already knew. Dr. Harris exhaled quietly. We're moving forward, he said. Slow, but forward. He glanced at Nina briefly. He's responding to you. Nina shook her head slightly. He's responding to himself, she said. I'm just here. Dr. Harris didn't argue with that. Stay that way, he replied. He stepped back, giving space again. But his attention didn't leave the bed. Nina leaned back slightly, though her hand remained firmly in place. Her breathing had steadied, but her focus hadn't. You made it this far, she said quietly. Don't stop now. She paused, then added, They're going to come back in here. More questions. More pressure. Her eyes stayed on his. Ignore all of that. Just stay. The light in the room shifted again as the sun dropped lower outside, casting longer shadows across the floor. Nina noticed it this time, but it didn't pull her attention away. Nothing did. You're not alone in here, she said after a moment. Not anymore. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, but it no longer felt like the only proof of life in the room. Something else had taken its place, something quieter, harder to measure, but stronger than before. Nina stayed where she was, her hand over his, her presence unchanged. But now there was something new in the space between them. Something more certain than that. The room held its shape as evening settled in, but something inside it had shifted in a way that no one could reverse. Nina didn't move her hand. Not after what she had felt. His fingers had answered. Not once. Not by accident, but with intent. And that changed everything. She sat there, steady now, her breathing even, her focus no longer searching but holding. You did that, she said quietly, her voice grounded. No one else. You. She didn't lean closer this time. Didn't push. She let the moment stand on its own. Dr. Harris remained near the foot of the bed, watching without interruption. He had stopped checking the monitor every few seconds. Now he watched the patient instead. We'll document this, he said after a moment, his tone measured. Sustained response, not reflex. Nina nodded. Gaikoja didn't look at him. He's coming back, she said. It wasn't a question. Doctor, Harris didn't correct her. He's choosing to, he replied, which carried more weight than confirmation. Footsteps approached again. Slower this time, but deliberate. The door opened, and the same younger man from earlier stepped in. Alone now. He didn't speak right away. His eyes went straight to Alex's hand, then to Nina's, then to Alex's face. He moved again, he said. It wasn't disbelief, just acknowledgement. Nina met his gaze briefly. Yes. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough to see clearly. That means he's not gone, he said. Nina shook her head slightly. He never was. The man studied her for a second, then looked back at Alex. If he wakes up, he said slowly, things don't go back to how they were. Nina didn't respond immediately. She understood what he meant, even without knowing the details. Nothing ever does, she said. That's not the point. He considered that, then gave a small nod. Fair enough. Dr. Harris stepped forward slightly. We're not at full consciousness yet, he said. But the pattern is clear. He's responding with intent. The man nodded again, absorbing that without pushing further. Then we wait, he said. This time there was no urgency in his voice, just acceptance. Silence returned. But it no longer felt like something that needed filling. Nina adjusted her position slightly, her hand still resting over Alex's, her thumb no longer moving. She didn't need to repeat the same motion now. You hear that? She said quietly. They're finally willing to wait. Her voice softened just a little. Took them long enough. For a moment, nothing changed. Then his fingers shifted again, not as strong as before, but clear. A response, not to urgency, not to pressure, but to presence. Nina exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing in a way they hadn't all day. That's enough, she said. You don't have to rush. She paused, then added, just don't stop. Dr. Harris made a note, then stepped back. We'll prepare for the next stage, he said. If this continues, we'll begin reducing sedation. Nina glanced at him briefly. And then? He looked at Alex, then back at her. Then he wakes up. The words didn't land like a dramatic shift. They settled, quietly, like something that had already begun. The younger man moved toward the door but paused before leaving. He looked back once more. He always did things on his own time, he said. Nina almost smiled, but it didn't fully form. Seems like he still does. The man gave a small nod, then left without another word. The room returned to just the two of them and the quiet presence of Dr. Harris, who soon stepped out as well, leaving Nina alone again. The difference now was that she didn't feel like she was holding the room together by herself. Something else was holding with her. She leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on Alex. You made it this far, she said. That wasn't easy. Her voice dropped just enough to feel personal, so don't let it go now. Her hand remained over his, not gripping, not guiding, just there. The connection didn't need force anymore. It had already been established. I told you before, she continued. You don't have to prove anything to me. She paused briefly. But you do have to show up for yourself. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, unchanged on the surface, but no longer the center of attention. Nina didn't look at it. She didn't need to. Whatever's waiting for you out there, she said quietly, it's still there. The good parts, the bad parts, all of it. She exhaled slowly. You don't get to skip it. Another small movement passed through his fingers, faint but real. Nina nodded once, more to herself than to him. Yeah, she said softly. That's what I thought. The light in the room dimmed further as evening settled fully, but the darkness didn't carry the same weight it had before. It no longer felt like something closing in. It felt like something passing through. Nina stayed where she was, her hand steady over his, her presence unchanged. You're not invisible in here, she said after a while. Not to me. She didn't say anything else after that. She didn't need to. The room held its own balance now. Not fragile, not uncertain, just waiting for the next step. Sometimes the people the world ignores are the ones who hold everything together when it matters most. This story reminds us that real strength is not always loud, and true influence doesn't come from power, but from presence, patience, and sincerity. When no one else was willing to wait, Nina stayed. When others saw a man's reputation, she saw his humanity, and in the quiet space between life and loss, it wasn't authority or fear that brought him back. It was a voice that didn't demand, a hand that didn't let go. Justice, in its deepest form, isn't always about punishment or control. Sometimes, it's about giving someone the chance to return, to choose, and to be seen for who they are beyond what the world has decided. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.